I'm Emma Taylor and the founder and managing director of Chief Disruptor. Great to have you with us at this Chief Disruptor Forum. We're focused on AI and synthetic data, creating value without compliance risk. This is the latest in our series of lively, insightful and interactive virtual sessions designed to connect industry leaders, practitioners and thought leaders together. We're going to explore the latest disruptive trends, adoption strategies, use cases and tools shaping business and technology today. We're going to zone in particularly on AI and synthetic data. For those of you who are new to Chief Disruptor, we're the community for disruptive business and technology leaders, and our purpose is to cut through the hype and enable our members to leverage disruptive trends through member-led insight reports, content and community activities. So with no further ado, let's dive into today's forum. Just to give a little bit of an intro, give a little bit of a sense of the aims today. AI is advancing faster than organizations can keep up. At the same time, regulatory scrutiny and data privacy expectations are at an all-time high. Leaders face an pressing challenge: how to unlock AI's full potential while maintaining trust and safeguarding sensitive data. Synthetic data has emerged as a transformational solution, enabling safe experimentation, accelerating adoption, and fostering innovation without compliance risks of real-world data. Today, we're joined by a brilliant panel of experts spanning AI, data, and technology strategy. They'll be unpacking how synthetic data is driving change in their industries. To give a little bit of an overview about both of them, Camille is the Director of Data at VML, where she brings together product and engineering to build impactful data solutions. With over 12 years experience in data and product, she specializes in scaling platforms, growing data maturity, and tackling governance, privacy, and compliance challenges, particularly under GDPR. Passionate about using data and tech for good, she's also an advocate for inclusivity, accessibility, and women in STEM. Outside of work, you'll find her throwing punches in martial arts classes, out on trails with her running club, or tracking down the best Asian food spots. At home, her two spirited young daughters keep her on her toes, providing the ultimate test in negotiation. And Tobias, who's the CEO of Mostly AI, is the leader in the space of privacy-preserving synthetic data. Originally from Vienna in Austria, he currently lives in Munich, Germany. Prior to joining Mostly AI, Tobias worked as a managing consultant with the Boston Consulting Group and in startups in different leadership roles. Tobias holds a PhD from Vienna University of Business and Economics, as well as an MBA from the Hans School of Business, UC Berkeley. In his free time, Tobias enjoys spending time in the mountains, hiking in the summer and skiing in winter. So let's begin with those introductions in a bit more detail coming to both of you. And if I can invite you both to share a little short overview of your current role, your background and how you've been working with the AI and data innovation, that would be a great place for us all to start. So I'm going to come to Camille first, myself on mute, and look forward to the session today. Thank you very much, Camille. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Emma, and good morning, everyone, if you're all in a relatively similar time zone to where we are. I think that intro pretty much covers the lifespan, but at the moment, my role is working with a great team of data engineers. We rebuilt the platform so that we could be AI ready, which I'm sure is one of those buzzwords that everyone is very familiar with. And we're really kind of scaling the remit of our data products at the moment, increasing our offering for a variety of clients. And yeah, I've been very fortunate to work across several different industries over my career, which is longer than I like to admit. But yeah, it's been a really great journey, and there's been plenty of challenges along the way. You know, when GDPR came up, that was you know, a whole set of other things we needed to think about, and now with AI coming in, the same again. So never a dull moment in technology. We're quite early, I'd say, in our forays with AI, so it's learning on the go still for us, but really enjoying it. And yeah, I'm very lucky to work with lots of very talented people across both the EU, US, and Asia Pac markets. So it's everyone's dealing with lots of different things, and it's yeah, love to share some more as the panel goes on.
Thank you, Camille, very much. And over to you, Tobias, please.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, so I've been with Most AI for more than 6 years now, and the company is certainly one of the pioneers in the space of privacy-preserving synthetic data, and we can discuss more today actually what synthetic data is, the different types of synthetic data, all those kind of things. That's really what we specialize in as a company. We typically serve large enterprise organizations with our software platform, with our enterprise product that then allows organizations to create synthetic data, but also can do lots of other things. So over the past years, certainly the AI hype also did not stop at us. So we've also incorporated lots of functionalities now that are driven by LLMs and powered by large language models into our product. And we work very closely with large organizations that are also adopting a lot of not only privacy preserving synthetic data, but AI tooling in general. So have a good view also on the broader landscape, I would say, when it comes to AI and AI adoption, and kind of like the obstacles that we see when it comes to data, but also when it comes to things like culture and processes in organizations. Yeah, so looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you both very much indeed. Let's get into this first question. I think we've particularly seen that hype. We've now seen obviously a lot of members going through some real challenges in terms of pilots, POCs, POVs, and so on. So AI is moving faster than most companies can absorb. I think we all have seen that, all know that. What's the one decision or habit that separates leaders who get real value from AI versus those that remain stuck in pilots? Based on what you just saying there, Tobias, I'm going to come straight to you. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So probably one decision or one habit, it's hard to really just pin it down to one thing. But if we have to decide on one thing, I would say, or maybe two things. I would say start small and start very concrete with business value in mind. What we've seen now in the past years is that AI and generative AI, large language models, the technology is, first of all, quite amazing. And second of all, it's moving very quickly. So in a lot of organizations, especially the larger organizations that have very talented data scientists and engineers, they obviously love to experiment and play around with the latest tech. And then initially, a lot of those POCs were really, kind of like demonstrating, okay, what is possible from a technological perspective. However, and I think that's now where I think the initial hype around AI has now come down a little bit, is, well, we realize at the end of the day, it's not about the tech per se. It's about, okay, what's the business impact, right? What's the value we can get out of it? And so then maybe instead of, focusing on the latest, RAG or fine tuning of models or those kind of things, like, yeah, start first with the business question in mind. What's actually the impact that you want to achieve? What's the value you want to create? What's the problem you want to solve, or process you want to optimize? And then start relatively small. Oftentimes the latest and the most fancy tech is actually not necessary. And even sometimes, traditional AI and machine learning models, like in the old days, is still totally fine and can do a lot of things. But that would be my recommendation, right? So not starting from the tech perspective, but starting from the business perspective.
Thank you so much. And Camille, with what you were just saying there in terms of where you are on your journey, you are certainly not alone, both with the audience today and with members more broadly. What are you seeing in terms of those decisions, habits that separate leaders to get that real sense of value from AI?
I couldn't agree more with what Tobias was saying. I think, having a real concrete idea of what you want to start with is critical. The other thing as well is you have to be willing to take a risk and be willing to put what you've got out there, and it might fail, it might not, but to use that failure as an opportunity to learn and to gather feedback from a real life setting, because there's only so much you can learn from the safety of your POC bubble, but that doesn't translate into necessarily, real life applications and feedback. So you need to be willing to then put your POC out there and see how it works or doesn't, or, work with your users and clients and start refining what you can do for the next stage.
Thank you so much. Can we stick with Camille, your role at VML, but also sort of the fact you are very early on this journey. We often hear about adoption hurdles, some of those Tobias was bringing up as well. What are you seeing as the most common blind spots leaders are overlooking when trying to innovate with AI? Because we've got to understand, obviously, why we're taking it on board in the first place. How do we make sure that those leaders are avoiding these blind spots, and what are those blind spots when it comes to innovative AI?
So I think there's two kind of main blind spots or hurdles that that people need to tackle. I think what we're seeing is a lot of great enthusiasm in AI, and it's very exciting. It's opened up a huge realm of possibilities. But on the flip side, that comes with a lot of nervous jitters and big question marks, because ultimately very few people understand and grasp the enormity of what AI can do. So I think it's important for leaders to work closely with their teams and understand their positioning and maybe the reluctance that they might have as well, because you won't be able to fully innovate and unlock the potential if you don't bring your people on board with you. So they might have a huge variety of concerns that you need to understand and work with. So it's really about reading the room and seeing where you are with your data literacy, and where do you sit on that data maturity curve, and has data become a big enough part of your culture that everyone is going to be able to adopt AI and help you innovate. And then the other one, which I think is probably more, well, the most important, especially to me coming from kind of the governance side of things, is that people forget sometimes that when you innovate with AI and anything related to data, it requires a good solid foundation. And I mean that both in terms of tech stack, but also process and the data itself, because you've no doubt heard garbage in, garbage out. So that's valid for anything that you're building. If it's a simple reporting dashboard or moving on to more complicated machine learning models, they'll only be as good as the data you put into them. So it's important to remember that when you're building your prototypes and then scaling your data products. And that includes anything using synthetic data, of course. Then once you've got a great product that yields results and you've built the trust, and lo and behold, you've got a user base, you need to then make sure your tech stack can keep up with the demand, because so often you can see people saying, yes, we built this thing, everybody loves it. And then what? And then you get stuck, and then, clawing that trust back can be an uphill battle. So assume it's going to work and people are going to love it, so that you're prepared for the next step.
Thank you so much. Tobias, with all the experience you've got across industries, your time at Boston Consulting Group, obviously your time at Mostly AI, can we delve into some of those challenges, some of those hurdles and so on that you've seen, and also ideally look at some of those use cases across industry with the audience, both in the community as a whole, but also those with us today? There's certainly a lot of breadth. So any use cases you can give us, any commonalities you're seeing as well, would be great to hear. Thank you.
Sure. So maybe to add what Camille was saying, I totally agree. Like data foundation is really one of the big blind spots and one of the hurdles. Because if you don't have the proper data to build your systems, train your models, then the fanciest tech on top of it is just not going to work. And so getting that foundation right is certainly, I think, one of the most important things you need to do as a first step. I think one other point in terms of blind spots and hurdles is leaders also need to understand what AI, especially Gen AI, can do, but also what it cannot do. So oftentimes, in enterprise settings, there is this idea or the prerequisite that AI needs to answer in a deterministic way. It's like, okay, it needs to get it right 100% of the time. That's just inherently difficult, right? It's not the way how those models work. I mean, these are statistical approaches, right? And you ask ChatGPT the identical question 2 different times, you will probably get different answers, right? And it's just a feature. It's not a bug. And so I think leaders also need to understand, okay, how do we then actually implement solutions, and how do we think about processes where it's fine that the answer will be like we want it to be in a certain way 80% of the time, and how are we then handling the 20% where it's different, and then what's the process that we generate, because you can still create a ton of value with those 80%, and then the edge cases, the other things, you just need to have the right process to deal with that. In terms of use cases and kind of like industries, I mean, clearly AI, Gen AI specifically, is now being used in all industries, right? There is really, I don't think there's any industry that is not impacted by AI, and there's probably not any function that is not impacted by AI. So it's really a very broad kind of thing. If we look at the situations or the use cases where we currently see the most impact, I would probably say software development, coding assistance. That's one of the ones where we really see a ton of value created. Also for us as a company, right? We develop software. All of our engineers are working with coding assistants, and it's just a huge time saver. It's just a tremendous productivity gain. Content creation, right? We probably have all seen this in terms of marketing documents, those kind of things. And then internal chatbots. I think that is still like the #1 enterprise use case that I see. I think probably almost every large enterprise organizations these days is starting or has their own, or is starting to get their own kind of like internal ChatGPT, using then different technologies to, I don't know, either fine-tune models or having retrieval augmented generation, some context engineering to get proper answers the way they want it. But and that can be a tremendous helpful tool then internally. We don't see that so much yet externally facing, right? Again, and then coming back to the initial point about the 80-20, given the concern that many organizations have, it's like, yeah, but if it's on customer facing, what if it doesn't get it right? So having this human in the loop in there is still one of the things that we see in practical implementations.
Thank you so much indeed. So that builds very nicely into my next question, which is about leadership, but also AI-driven change. I think over the last 20 years of running the community, we found that members have often had that stumbling block when it's come to culture, when it's come to change management and so on. Obviously, this is a huge change, whether it's AI, generative AI, general AI, whatever we're looking at. Innovation often fails not because of the technology, but because of leadership. What's the hardest part of leading AI-driven change in your organization? How do we try and get that right? So Camille, what's the hardest part for you when it comes to all of that change?
Well, different parts of the organization are in different places, but broadly speaking, again, I think we're working with two streams. One of them is, lots of enthusiasm, motivation, experimentation, but then perhaps not thinking about the next step. So the reproducibility and the scale, and, once you've built this cool, shiny thing, then what? People love it, but you're stuck. And then, you lose the momentum and you lose the crowd and you have to start all over again. So I think making sure that, you've thought about this new phrase, seeing around the corner, but I guess that's kind of what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to see what's coming next. And then the other end is the resistance to change, and either because it's such a big unknown or because of the stigma that comes with the fact that AI is grounded in data, and data can be a scary term. And, I know from a personal stance, I never thought I'd have a career in data because I didn't like math class. I was like, well, I couldn't possibly do data. When someone came to me and said, would you like to do this? I was like, well, I hate numbers. Why would I do this? And then I was like, actually, this is not just about numbers. It's pretty cool and it's not scary. And I hope that we can share our enthusiasm with the attendees here today and any potential skeptics. So yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things where you have to tackle the situation based on who you're working with, and kind of tailor your approach. And that's how we're tackling change at the moment. It's as complex as the large language models we're building.
Thank you so much. Tobias, you're talking to a lot of leaders all the time across different industries, different organizations. How are they going to get through all of this AI-driven change?
think one important point is that leaders really need to use the technology themselves, because what I've seen is, some leaders, especially senior leaders, that either go into one or the other extreme. One extreme being like, oh, this is just a hype, whatever, things will settle down in a couple of years. Or the other extreme is like, okay, AI can solve everything. We're just gonna, throw AI at it, and the results will be amazing. When the reality is, probably somewhere in between. But if you don't understand the technology yourself, right, then it's just a little bit more difficult to guide your teams, to ask the right questions, to challenge, and those kind of things. I remember back in when ChatGPT came out, and then everyone was talking about transformer models, and it felt like, oh, everyone needs to read the initial paper. Attention is all you need. How transformer models are being built, and those kind of things. And that's not the point, right? Not necessarily every leader needs to become a data scientist and really understand in details how transformers or other model architectures are working. But you need to have the kind of practical understanding. Like if you don't use ChatGPT yourself, like how can you then work for your teams? So that would be my number one advice: use the technology yourself, and then take it from there.
And I think what you've said there echoes very well with the community. That one sense of this is everything, or it's just hype, and where do we find that middle ground? As you say, we've got to make sure that we're using it in order to actually have those right conversations. Let's deep dive now into synthetic data. And synthetic data has been held as a safe accelerator for AI. Tobias, can you share with the audience today, and then and more broadly with the community, how it's actually being used today and where it fits into the broader AI innovation landscape for us, please?
Yeah, sure. So I think synthetic data, maybe it's important first to specify the term a little more concretely, because different people, when they hear synthetic data, they oftentimes have different understandings of the term. So one form of synthetic data, or like the one actually that we've been working on for the longest time, is what I would call privacy preserving machine learning generated synthetic data. Quite a long term, but in essence, what it means is you take some original data, existing data that you have, production data in your organization. You use machine learning, you use generative models to train them with that original data. And then with those trained models, you create a privacy preserving, so a fully anonymous version of data. And for that, synthetic data is really just a very effective way to anonymize data, giving you very high privacy guarantees on the one hand, but on the other hand, also just very high quality data. And there the use cases are, anywhere where data access is an issue, anywhere where GDPR privacy requirements are an issue. You can't make data accessible internally. You can't make data accessible with external partners. That's where synthetic data can really help, and it can really help you with innovating, speeding up innovation, trying out new things, just making it easier for people to work with data. The second form of synthetic data that then I would say emerged more over the past 2 or 3 years is where you don't have any data to begin with. And you just use the pre-trained world knowledge of large language models to create data out of nothing. And it's actually quite amazing to see how well that works. You can just, everyone can try this yourself, right? You can go to ChatGPT and you can say, give me a data set that looks like, I don't know, UK households and their, I don't know, banking accounts and something like that. And you will get some data. It looks realistic. It is based on the world knowledge that those large language models have. But of course, it's not statistically accurate. You wouldn't do any kind of like data science tasks with that kind of data, but you can use it for software testing. You can use it for demo environments. You can use it wherever, again, you have a hard time getting access to original data. And then out of that area, space, what has now also developed, and over the particular 1 to 2 years, so more recently even, is the whole idea of using synthetic data, or this kind of LLM-generated synthetic data, for market research purposes. And so if you now talk to FMCG companies, oftentimes synthetic data for them is just research. It's like, okay, instead of asking humans what they actually like, do you prefer Coke or Pepsi? You ask an LLM, you ask a large language model. And of course, you can give some context to that large language model. You can say, well, you are a, well, I don't know, 25-year-old person living in London, answer in this and that way. And it's actually also quite interesting to see the kind of results you get out of that. It's certainly much cheaper than asking humans in actual market research. But of course, it comes with some limitations. It's artificial. It contains or reflects all the biases that are in those large language models and on the data they were trained upon. But nevertheless, large companies like P&G and others are now starting to look into that in terms of augmenting or assisting their research functions.
Thank you very much indeed. It's fascinating, isn't it, to see where we've come from in that last 2 to 3 years, the conversations, whether it's personal conversations, professional conversations, how much ChatGPT and others are coming into their own. But I think the next question that we want to delve into is something I know, Camille, you'll have very strong personal views on when it comes to all the work you've done, but also then obviously professionally what you're seeing across the organization. So in industries like defense, finance, pharmaceuticals and others, data is both sensitive and strategic. How can leaders innovate without compromising security or compliance? You're obviously living and breathing that, Camille, at the moment. Can you give us a sense of what leaders can do? Because security, we're seeing breaches. Another one happened in the UK just this week, or end of last week, with Jaguar Land Rover. We've seen the likes of Harrods, Co-op, and obviously Marks Spencer's and others. There's a constant security and compliance concerns, cyber hacks coming through, etc. How do we make sure that that data, when it is both sensitive and strategic, how can we innovate without compromising? Over to you.
So again, I think one of the strongest foundations you can have in terms of security and compliance is making sure that data is really embedded in your culture, because there's only so many times you can get people to sit in front of a computer and do a training video and, you know, pass the test and checkbox. But if people don't understand what they're working with and, you know, the implications, then that's, you know, it is just a checkbox exercise and it won't get you anywhere. So having strong foundations in that sense to make sure that everyone working with the data and with AI, because it is everywhere now, as you mentioned, you know, those internal chatbots that everyone's got, it allows so many more people to interact with the data, which is great. But it also means that you now have people who perhaps aren't as data literate working with potentially very sensitive data. So, so that's a pretty important one. And having the tech in place as well, of course, and the processes, but also not being afraid of security and governance. And, you know, at the risk of sounding like Monica Geller, I believe that rules are there to help the fun. So, you know, work within those parameters, embrace them, know what they are, know where the lines are, and be prepared. You can do everything right and people will still find a way to, you know, steal your precious data gold. So be prepared for it, have something in place, and just, you know, have the processes, practice, have a disaster recovery plan, all these things. They need to just be second nature, just like logging onto your computer in the morning.
Thank you so much. Tobias, you've obviously seen this front and center, the risk averse organizations that you deal with, those that have got high regulations and so on, across different geographies, different data governance and so on. How do we make sure that they can feel that they can take the risk, as Camille was saying, but also that they feel safe seeing all the risks that they've seen?
Yeah, as Camille was saying, I think governance and having the right awareness around data and limitations is important. From a technology perspective, right, there are what's called PETs, privacy enhancing technologies. One of them is synthetic data, so certainly a way to make sure that your data is fully anonymous, and in that case, yeah, making sure that, you know, you don't leak any individual information, any sensitive information in training algorithms or in applications that you're building. And of course, us being a vendor in that space, I would definitely recommend and advocate for using synthetic data. It's interesting because, you know, we've done a lot of work in banking and telecommunications, so kind of like, you know, private but regulated industries. And now for the first time, we got from the IT subsidiary of a large European army RFI invitation. So they're now starting to look at synthetic data as well, because yes, of course, also, you know, in defense and military, there's now more and more data involved, oftentimes sensitive data, also like kind of data that, yeah, you don't necessarily want to make them accessible to everyone within the organization, right? If you're looking at software testing, for example, like what data data will then people test with. And then, yeah, synthetic data can be a good alternative to still be able to innovate, to implement AI, but to do it in a safe and compliant way.
Thank you so much. Let's look at digital twins. Often, we've got different things that we've got to be considering. Digital twins is one, predictive analytics is another. So those applications, how is AI reshaping decision making in your sectors and in your organization sectors? But what role does synthetic data play to enable that? So just to give that question again, so looking at applications such as digital twins and predictive analytics, how is AI reshaping decision making in your sector or the sectors that you work with? And also, what role does synthetic data play enabling that? Camille, perhaps you can give us a marketing consumer data perspective.
Sure. So synthetic data, I think, is great in helping you build upon foundations of trust and relationships that you should already have built with your internal and external stakeholders. It allows us to create data sets and cohorts that represent our users and ensure we can continue to provide services rather than having to make educated guesses because we are not our users, right? So the greatest opportunity in marketing and consumer data is that because of things like GDPR and further privacy laws and things like that, you're losing the amount of people that you can collect data from, but also narrowing the data points that you can collect, right? So synthetic data allows us to increase that pool and also create a data set that represents our entire ecosystem and opens up the aperture of the analysis and the insights that you can generate. So that's really great for things that are, for example, reaching back to when I worked in health tech, being able to increase the representation of underrepresented communities or cohorts, especially in things like research around mental health and places where there's still a lot of, or communities where there's still a lot of stigma, being open about, where you are in your medical health situation. So that means that it enables decision making that takes into account the whole human picture rather than just a very small, focused lens. But of course, like everything else, there's also the potential to introduce bias, especially because it's synthetic, right? So it's built on something that a human put in place. So it's incredibly important to have checks and balances, regularly assess the outputs of your data products, and document all of these things, document your processes, document your QA results so that you can prove the reliability and efficacy of what you're building. And then you can demonstrate to your stakeholders, to your users, your customers, that the manner in which you're driving your decision-making is dependable and consistent, and perhaps even more so than before because you're working with a more complete data set.
Thank you so much. And that strand seems to come off a lot, doesn't it? That dependency and that trust and feeling that actually those can believe in it, particularly with the change in technologies and so on. Tobias, coming to you, you've got those digital twins coming through, predictive analytics in terms of applications. Can we just look at the decision making and how AI is reshaping that you're seeing on the ground and that role of synthetic data?
Yeah, I think Camille already gave a very good overview that's actually applicable also in other industries. So yeah, whenever you have access issues with the production data or you maybe even can't collect original data, yeah, synthetic can be a replacement, can be something that you can also sometimes augment with production data. It is quite flexible. Camille also mentioned things like biases that you need to think about, but you can also correct for biases with synthetic data because it is quite a flexible tool. You can create more data, you can create outliers, you can create underrepresented groups, those kind of things. And so yeah, you can create a digital twin basically that is not grounded on only actual data, but also maybe on augmented or partly synthetic, and that can still then enable you to innovate, build your models, stress test your models, those kind of things. So I think it's really across industries relatively new technology still, right? So the technical means for doing these kind of data simulations or synthetic data generations wasn't there, 5-10 years ago. So it's still relatively new, but companies are certainly starting to see the benefits and starting to experiment with that across industries.
Thank you so much. And I think that stress testing is important, isn't it? Coming back to Camille's point, so many organizations are constantly being checked from external agents to see whether they can break into it, what they're going to do, how does that affect their reputation, both externally and also the trust internally. There's so much going on that these organizations, leaders, team leaders have got to consider. So to have all of these opportunities is fantastic. But as we talked about, you've got to make sure that you've got the right things on the ground in order to make sure that you're going to be in a safe environment. Let's look ahead to 2030. Sounds ages away, but actually nearly only 4 years away. What is one role AI will play in innovation that no other technology can, and how can synthetic data intersect with that vision? So Tobias, I'd love to hear your take on that. 4 years to go till 2030. What is one role that AI will play in innovation that no other technology can, and how can synthetic data intersect with that vision?
Yeah, that's a very broad question. In terms of, what's the one thing that AI can do that previous technologies cannot do? And that's what we've now seen over the past years. The current approach to AI is based on large language models, models that are trained on kind of like text most of the time, but increasingly also different types of data that then self-learn from those inputs, and then are able to do kind of like magic at the end of the day. It really feels like magic. And so the one thing I think that's for sure, and that I think we can all predict for the next couple of years, those LLMs will only get better, right? So there is on the one side, technological advances when it comes to the model architectures, the way how those models are built. There's computational advances in terms of kind of like the compute resources and how much training can actually be done. And then there's the third piece, which is super important. We talked about it already today, which is the data piece, because also those large language models are trained on data. And some people argue that almost kind of like all the publicly available knowledge of the world, like all the text that has been written, all the books, all the internet documents and everything, has already been somehow consumed, and already we're almost like hitting this ceiling where there's just not enough or not more data to train large language models on. And that's where synthetic data can come into play, and it already does today. So a lot of the foundational model builders like OpenAI and Anthropic and other companies, they're already using today synthetic data to augment data sets, to create artificial versions of data sets that then actually help in that training of the large language models. And so in that sense, synthetic data will play an important role. Again, the different types of synthetic data that we discussed today. Sometimes it's also about unlocking, for example, proprietary data sets from organizations that in the past were not able to be used for training large language models, that in the synthetic version can be used to train large language models. But I would say that's the one prediction I think that I feel quite comfortable about, as well as yes, LLMs will get better, and almost every week new models come out, and then depending on the benchmark, at one time Grok is the best, and then OpenAI's GPT is the best, and next week we have some Chinese models that are the best. But that will continue, and what will continue is that synthetic data will be an integral part in training those large language models.
Fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. I know that with some of the audience today, there may well be thoughts on what they think could be happening for 2030 and what key role is going to be in play. So if you've got your thoughts there you want to share, please do feel free to put that into the chat function, or indeed Q&A if you've got a question. So please do, if you want to give us your thoughts on that, please do. Camille, over to you. 2030, not that far away. What's the one role AI will play in innovation that no other technology can? What are your thoughts?
I think unlocking previously untappable areas of data because of the sensitivity and perhaps the complexity. I I think that'll be a game changer, and primarily due to synthetic data. I think I was reading that 60% of the data used in 2030 is likely to be synthetic. So it's, that's going to be a pretty big shift. I'd like to see it being used to solve more nature-related problems. I think at the moment it's or at least from where we're sitting, it's been primarily used to, how can we develop more products, more technology, more of everything, but being able to, I don't know, simulate lots more things about space or the ocean, or, lots of cool things, and the ecosystem and things like that. I'd love to see that taking off as well. And if anyone in the audience has some literature on that, please ping me, because I'm interested in finding out more. But yeah, that would be nice.
Thank you. Yes, I had a fascinating conversation with a member of Backspace literally about 2 weeks ago. So we'll make sure that we can get you involved in that too. So let's come to the boardroom. Always a tricky place to be, always a critical place to be. We hear again and again AI-driven economies being the absolute focus. So whether we've looked at the likes of Microsoft, whether we're looking at UK PLC, AI is coming up again and again as that AI-driven economy, or indeed absolutely fundamental to any organization's success, survival, growth, and much more. So if you were sitting in the boardroom tomorrow, what's the one mindset shift or structural change you'd insist leaders make immediately to avoid being left behind because of that economy? So over to you, Tobias, please.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, actually do it. It's surprising, but sometimes when I speak to those large enterprise organizations, especially here in Central Europe, they are not allowing their employees to use tools like ChatGPT, right? It's like the company policy, like, yeah, we can't do it, and yes, there are many reasons why we can't do it. From privacy over data governance to not trusting people, then to double check the outputs, whatever, right? And that is just shocking to me, right? I mean, the one thing that I think the mindset should be like, no, this is the future, and let's work on how can we actually, make it a technology that is accessible and that is used, and how do we educate people how to safely use the technology? How do we, find the ways of, when it comes to privacy, for example, implement this in a way where, yes, we of course protect privacy, we protect our not in violation of GDPR and other regulations, but there are ways to do that, right? So I think the mindset where like, no, this is going to happen. We need to empower the organization. We need to empower people to actually use the technology. And then, as Camille was saying, also having the risk tolerance that yes, sometimes it will fail, right? And that's okay. But only if we start, actively working with the technology, we can really start to eventually in the long run get the benefits from it. So I think that's something where some maybe players in the US and other markets are sometimes a little more aggressive than us here in Europe, where we, of course, especially in the European Union, we have kind of like a lot of regulation and tend to regulate first and then kind of like to try to do it afterwards. Whereas in the US, it's the other way around, right? People and companies just doing it, and then afterwards they think about regulation. So sometimes I think we can maybe take a little bit more of that approach also here in Europe, and would benefit from that.
Can I just build on that, because I'm sure there are members both in the audience today and more broadly who say that's great that you're saying that. You're able to say that because you're running your own organization and so on. How do we make that happen in a tightly regulated environment, which we see with the EU and indeed both in the UK when it comes to GDPR? How do we enable that? We hear many members when we run our breakfast clubs and others saying we can't, we don't let anyone have access to ChatGPT in the organization and so on. How do we get beyond that when we know we've got regulations? There's nervousness. A lot of them are highly regulated organizations, highly risk averse to protect customers and so on. What would you suggest? Because it sounds great, but how do we make it a reality for them?
There are concrete technological solutions, how you can implement things in a absolute compliant kind of way, right? So yes, if you don't want to work with a US provider, then okay, great, then choose the European provider, right? If you don't want to leave your data anywhere from your IT infrastructure, okay, great, then self-host a open source large language model. You can do that, right? So it's the technology is there. Of course, you need to have the experts that are then able to actually implement it in those kind of ways. And I think you also need the people from the governance side, from the privacy side of things, that have this can-do mindset instead of the, oh, let's avoid and let's just of course the safest option is always to do nothing, because then nothing can happen. But that's also just not the way how AI and innovation will thrive. So I think you need to have the right people in the right place, but you also need to empower them, give them the tooling and the capabilities to make things happen. But the ways are there. You can do it.
Thank you. Camille, do you agree with that? What are your thoughts? Because it is trickier. You live and breathe compliance and GDPR and so on every day. You've probably got sort of pulling from the organization saying, I want to do this, and others saying, no, you can't. So what would you suggest?
Again, I think it comes to having that, as Tobias mentioned very early on at the start, it's about having that very clearly defined vision. Because if you can clearly articulate what it is that you're trying to achieve, not necessarily a step-by-step guide of how you're going to achieve it, but a relatively good idea of the path that you want to take to get there, then you will be able to bring the rest of the organization on board. But if everything is wishy-washy and you can't answer the questions, it doesn't really give the impression that you've got A, confidence in what you're trying to achieve, but also B, that you've properly thought about it. So being able to really say, this is what we're trying to do, these are the measurements for success, then you can people will trust that they should invest the time and the money in what you're trying to achieve, and will then be able to empower you. So you need to demonstrate that you also deserve that trust, I guess, and being able to choose the right tools as well, not just throwing money at the newest shiny tech because that's what everyone's talking about. You need to have an investment into the right people, into your into the right tech stack, and then empower the people to be able to actually deliver it.
Thank you very much indeed. So a lot of members are going to be coming back from summer holidays, really starting to focus not just on 2025 and that delivery, but also onto 2026 and planning further out where they can do. I think we're seeing from a lot of members that they're really struggling to get into 3 to 5 year plans, which we always still love talking about, dreaming about, and so on. We're much more into tactics of sort of 1 year plans at the moment, month by month. Many of our members across different sectors are saying that they're really having to be incredibly tactical, monitoring sort of quarter by quarter sometimes, but month by month quite often. So let's look at another question here, which is, for a senior leader who hasn't yet experimented with synthetic data, what's the smartest first move you could make tomorrow, or at least plan to be starting in 26, to build momentum safely? Tobias, can I come to you on that one?
Yeah, sure. So 2 things. First, I would say, again, coming back also to the very first statement around being concrete and think about the business value, right? So, for example, was there a project in the past, that couldn't get off the ground because people are saying, yeah, we don't have the data, we don't have the access to the data, right? Then great. That that is something that could be one specific data set, one kind of like way of starting to work with synthetic data. I'm much more advocating for this kind of like concreteness, whereas like just in general exploring the technology. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the tech is there, right? So there are tools out there, there are vendors out there. For example, we have released earlier this year a fully open source, fully permissive SDK for synthetic data generation. It doesn't cost you anything. You can use it for free, and then just get going, right? So it's not like you really need to I don't know, plan or build up processes or like lots of things around it. Like, no, you can get going immediately, right? You can install, for example, our SDK within a couple of minutes in any Python environment. You identify the data set, you identify the concrete use case, and you just get going and learn and take it from there.
Thank you very much. Will, to you, let's see how we can get some of the members on that synthetic data journey. What would you suggest?
Yeah, absolutely. Get started, play around with it. Start with something small, and again, something that you can measure, to make sure that, you know, should your experimentations and, you know, you're either at work or just if you're playing around at home, just tinkering, trying to remember what your logins are and things like that. Make sure that whatever it is that you're playing around with is measurable, and you can say, hey, I did this thing and it worked really well. What if we then took the next step, and what would that look like? So don't be afraid, especially if you're using synthetic data. You know, it's a safe sandbox, at least for the beginning of what you're trying to do. So get stuck in.
Thank you very much indeed. I think that's been incredibly useful for members. I think that, as you say, that they're getting stuck in is key. And I think that often once we've had that reboot, or a lot of members have had that reboot over the summer, and also their teams and their leaders have had that sort of reboot, hopefully there's a sense, right, what can we do? We've got a good run between now and Christmas. And then from there, we really need to focus on how can we succeed in 2026. I think a lot of members have felt that they've been on a roller coaster for years and years now, with obviously with COVID, with problems post that, whether it's been train strikes or getting people back into work, whatever it's looked like, but also then obviously constant attrition when it comes to customers. How do we get loyalty up? How do we ensure that we're looking after our ecosystems, our suppliers? Constant challenges politically, and indeed obviously from a safety environment, and then economically, and across different geographies. So a lot to consider in this conversation, a lot of change when it comes to technology, and a lot for members to think about. I think some of those key takeaways have been to try and continue to fail, something we talk about, but is always tricky in more risk-averse organizations. Great to hear from Tobias that there are a lot of technologies out there that are safe environments, sandboxes, and so on to look at. Also, Camille, on the ground to hear what you've been doing, both with the teams, with the leadership team and so on, and that you are early on that journey, but you are understanding that it is a journey and that there are challenges ahead, but also successes that can be made from it. So a huge thank you to both of you today for joining us. Incredibly insightful panel discussion, but also to make it very human in the sense of what can be achieved and where we are going with it, all the way up to 2030 and beyond, but also to our audience today, and indeed our community more broadly, for being involved, for asking those questions, for asking us to bring this really important topic to the fore today, and indeed to Alexa within the team for generating this and making all of it happen. So a really good session and some really interesting points brought across. Hopefully many of the members can take back to their own organizations. We'll be posting the recording of today's forum on our chiefdisruptor.com website, also our monthly Chief Disruptor Insights, and also our YouTube channel. So please do feel free to share that with your colleagues and with your teams. Take it away, utilize it, and start doing things with it, because I think AI and synthetic data definitely can drive that business value, as it's been shown today and as we've heard. So a big thank you to Tobias again, and to Camille, to all of you as always, and we look forward to seeing you at our forthcoming activities very soon. Many thanks.